change is the hardest thing to do. In that the easiest thing to do is to allow things to remain the same, even to an individual's own detriment. So people in difficult relationships convince themselves that whatever they're dealing with is either okay or better than what it could be. Things could be worse. And this is not a thing that just happens naturally compared to how often this is projected onto us by a system that maintains control over individuals and masses of people. So people do this on an individual scale. This is also done on a mass scale. You have to be conditioned to maintain your lack of change, just as you have to be conditioned to maintain your lack of strength. In this world of givers and takers, once the takers take everything, they get bored. And the game of taking becomes what they need to fill that emptiness because they've taken everything. So this is why people, when they get all the money in the world, they seek power. When individuals break down, for example, their loved one or supposed loved one, when they break them all the way down to nothing, they have no sense of self at all. Strip them of their culture, strip them of their family, strip them of their connections to anything that is natural, strip them from themselves. When they strip them of everything, in some of the worst cases, they then resort to physical abuse. It's a direct hit, no pun intended, it's a direct hit. Immediate supply, comparable to an edible and smoking a joint. Yes, you'll get the same effect to some degree, but when you need an immediate hit, you're not going to look to an edible. You're going to spark up a joint. And this is what these individuals do. They spark up that narcissistic hit in order to get what they need right now. And comparable to the chemical reactions in your brain when people pay attention to pornography, you burn out those neurons to where you can't even experience baseline joy, baseline happiness, because your only sense of anything, any kind of feeling, is to have that highest of the high response. So the smile from your child is not going to do the same thing to you psychologically, chemically, in your brain chemistry. It's not going to affect you the same way. If you have burned out those receptors to only respond to the most intense, the most potent jolt of sensory overload. So what happens over time is that you end up feeling less, wanting more, constantly needing more, because anything that you experience is not enough. This is why the porn industry is so in your face, in your reality. This is why mainstream media and social media, it's just diet pornography. It's just the same kind of receptor. You need that hit over and over and over again. This is why people grab their phones all the time. It's a technological trigger. It's a boppy. It's a pacifier. You are being pacified. We are being pacified every moment of the day. These phones are pacifiers. Quite literally, these e-cigarettes are pacifiers. Grown people walking around. Anytime something happens that throws you just the slightest off kilter, give me a puff, give me a puff, give me a puff. It's not only that, it's with cannabis and anything else. Cigarettes is the same thing. These tools, these mechanisms are what are used to maintain control over the individual and the masses. How this translates over to the family dynamic involving narcissistic parents, which is the extreme case that happens when you have generations upon generations of people who are ripped away from themselves. They've been ripped away. They have generations upon generations of burnt out neurons, burnt out receptors, completely disconnected. The extreme case is to then feed on your own children. This is quite literally celebrated in Christmas with this Krampus entity and all the stories of people, parents eating their own children, eating babies. Metaphorically, on a massive scale, this is happening every day. This is a form of control. To have the mass population destroyed before they even become strong enough to defend themselves. Have the previous generation destroy the generation that will be a threat. Until that threat is neutralized, this is where we are right now, where you have more than half of the population who are completely okay with the corruption and the deceit and the death and the destruction that is the norm. It is the norm to allow these things to happen every day. And it's the norm because we have been conditioned, like I said, in reference to change being one of, if not the hardest thing to do, because change takes looking at oneself. So before we even entertain the idea of change, one has to entertain the idea of looking at your own reflection. And to give an example of the extreme cases, because this exists on the not so extreme cases, which makes up the majority of the people that are out there, narcissistic individuals as a whole have the most difficulty with this because they're the ones that have the most difficulty with change. And they have that difficulty with change because they have the difficulty with self-reflection. And if you are separated from your sense of self, you're even more separated from the idea of self-reflection, let alone going into the next step of actually making a change. So if you have no sense of self, you can have no sense of self-reflection, and you can have no sense of change. So we are no less than 3 layers separated from making an actual change, let alone even entertaining the idea of change. So with the parental unit involving narcissistic parents, even outside of narcissistic parents, the children represent reflections of the parents. At the base level, before any of the conditioning takes place, the child of the mother and father is in many different ways a very clear reflection of these individuals. So the side effect to having a narcissistic individual, a parent, involved in that situation, forced into a reflection. What happens when you force people into a corner? They will fight. So these individuals will fight themselves through their children. They will fight their reflection. They will destroy that reflection. They will break that reflection, that mirror, into so many pieces, you will not be able to make out the image that was meant to be. They will create monsters so that nobody will be able to see what these individuals could have been. A successful, a healthy, a balanced, a powerful child to a narcissistic parent does nothing less but expose the shortcomings of those parents. This is why these individuals have to destroy their children. They need to destroy their children because the outcome is the opposite of narcissistic supply, an exposure of them. If they destroy the child, then they will have a lifetime of supply from that child, constantly needing to mend those wounds, to fill those crevices. A child who has been subjected to a narcissistic parental unit 9 times out of 10 will spend their entire lives seeking their approval, not only from the parents, but from life, from people, from relationships, from work, either overworking themselves or digging themselves into a living grave, being as small as they can be or being as big as they can be. But even when they get that big, nothing will be able to fill that space of emptiness. So they themselves will turn into monsters because they have not worked on themselves. They have just created another facade, another distraction, another world to distract from the internal world, another projection to hide behind. And this is a lot of times carried out with the American dream mentality, the successful job, the successful relationship, and then the successful parents with their children, the next generation of lost, broken souls. And they will do the same thing their parents did to them, just in a different style, trying to run away 9 times out of 10, trying to do what their parents didn't do. And since they haven't actually worked on that situation, they will do the same thing that their parents did to them, just in a different style. And then they will reflect upon them the same image that they reflected onto their parents. And the cycle will continue. Children are living reflections, growing reflections, evolving reflections. When you raise them, they are learning before they even get to speak. They're learning in the womb, the energies that they are coming into. Their chemistry is adjusting before they're even born to the world that they're coming into. And then when they get here, these parents, the parents who didn't have a foundation of themselves, anything healthy to stand upon, subconsciously, consciously, they create the same atmosphere, the same world, without even knowing it. Because of the change that they need to do largely exists without them knowing it. So the next generation, in order to learn, in order to give them an opportunity to work on themselves and to not project onto the next generation, what they need to work on is reflected to them through their children. And if they haven't done that self-work, that weight will be put on the shoulders of the next generation. This is why you have these generations of what they're calling boomers. Their world is incomparable to what we're dealing with today. Their basic needs were available. Make it even more complex. These basic needs and these systems that we're dealing with that work against us are even harder when you're dealing with certain, what they're calling races, cultures, people. They even call us minorities. In a world where we are the majority, we are labeled as a minority. Our basic needs, food, clothing, shelter, security, are largely unavailable to us. And we're more than available to other demographics of people. This is part of that change, that self-reflection that needs to be addressed, that needs to be looked at. This is why it's so difficult when you bring up the race, the so-called racial discussion, the race discussion. Like I said before, change is the hardest thing to do. Reflection is one of the hardest things to do. You bring up their history. You bring up the ancestors. You bring up these systems. They will fight to the death to keep from acknowledging that world. So-called white people are the test subjects for these mind controls. They have been put upon a pedestal while others have been buried underneath the dirt and projected onto both of those groups. You're equal. You're going through the same thing. What does that do to the minds of both sides of that story? Those of us who have gone through that, we are no longer standing in that space of being the victim. We are not the victims. We are more powerful than that. We are owning that. And that scares the shit out of the people who have been put into that position of power over you. Just standing up and standing in your own is a threat. Owning who you are is a threat. And even when you stand out and say who you are, what you are, they then have to project onto you and tell you your story. For example, and I won't go into too much detail, individuals who are calling themselves African American, calling themselves Black, the indigenous people of this land, stolen land, who these individuals have been projected onto us. They have taken our name, our birthright, and that world told them that it's their birthright. Changing who we are from what we have been told to be back to who we originally were threatens that artificial power that this entire world has been built around. So when you stand on your own, when you stand in your power and you say, no, I am not what you have told me I am. I am this, regardless of if it makes you uncomfortable. This is who I am. When you stand in that space, they have to double down and go over your head again, Say, no, you don't tell that story. We tell you what story you need to tell. Don't talk about this indigenous American story because it makes us uncomfortable. You talk about the human story. We're all human. We're all being attacked. We're all this. We're all that. What does that do? It waters down your situation, your perspective, and then it puts them in a position of power again when they say, no, you're not this, you're this. You're wrong for coming at this situation from that perspective. You're this. And this is where we are right now. The world has crumbled into shit. Nobody knows who they are, what to do, where to go. And when you have people who are healing themselves, healing these wounds that have been put on us for so long, this is why it's so much easier for us to come into this change, because we've been living in that murky, festering, broken foundation, broken infrastructure of who and what we are for so long. We need to change. We want to change. But when you've had everything spoon-fed to you in so many different ways, it's that much harder to change. So if you're changing, you create a reflection for these individuals, and then you become that black sheep. You become that child. We are seen as animalistic children to these individuals. Owning your humanity, owning your birthright, owning your sense of self and who and what you are is a threat to them, no different than a child standing in his or her power in light of all the abuse and downplaying and projection onto a child from a narcissistic parent. We are standing up and we are seeing with eyes that are no longer blurred by the illusions, blurred by the false promises, blurred by the lack of power. We are coming into a space that these individuals who have been put in that space of power, they don't have a leg to stand on. We've had our leg. We've always had our legs. They've just been consistently beat down and broken. And we've been hobbling and limping along through life this whole time, trying to be equal to that illusion, trying to be accepted, trying to be that child that wants the approval of that parent that's been feeding on them for their entire lives, since before they were born. They told their story about being a parent before you're even born. They built themselves up before you were even birthed into this world. And they continued that process of standing on you, on your shoulders, those baby shoulders, stomping you to keep them on that illusory world of success, of responsibility, hiding under the mask of mainstream propaganda, of mainstream success, of mainstream intelligence. But it's all crumbling now, and they don't have any legs to stand on. And we're finding our bearings, we're finding our legs, and it hurts like hell for people to see that. So they will do anything they can to beat you down, to stop that change from happening. Because when you change, it exposes their lack of change. It exposes their criminal behavior. It exposes their weaknesses. We are no longer allowing ourselves to turn our own children into monsters. We're no longer allowing ourselves to hold that space of being a monster. We were never those monsters. The days of looking in those funhouse carnival mirrors are over. The distorted reflections that are projected onto us are no more. We're not looking in those mirrors anymore. They made those mirrors distorted for us to look at, to stare at, to see us a certain way. You look in the mirror and you see yourself as obese, psychologically obese, sick, diseased. You hate yourself. You hate the way your hair is. You hate the way your skin looks. You hate your nose. You hate this. You hate every single thing that is natural to who and what you are. Because compared to the golden projection on this world, You are the opposite of beautiful. You're the opposite of powerful. You're the opposite of intelligent. But we are no longer those monsters. And just stepping out of that house of mirrors, those broken mirrors, exposes these individuals, exposes these programs. And this is just the baseline level of this stuff. This is what's happening on the baseline. Beyond this, there are controllers who are manipulating the system. I've gone into this in previous videos talking about the archons and the beyond the money changers. It's good to know that information. But if you want to start at the ground level to actually start changing, that accountability has to be in-house. And this is how we can start adjusting these signals to see this, seeing that lack of accountability, seeing those reflections, looking a little deeper into how this stuff works so it doesn't hurt so much when we start to make that change. Because it is difficult. It is not easy to do this. I've been on this journey for over a decade now, looking at what I've been through, looking at what people around me have been through, watching these reflections, watching these projections, these attacks on a massive scale. This is what's happening on YouTube and any of these other mainstream platforms out there. YouTube provides individuals the ability to reflect onto the world unfiltered information, unfiltered reflections, unfiltered observations. That is a threat to the norm, the propagandistic norm of maintaining control over these monsters. You start telling people they're not monsters anymore, that's a threat. You start showing people the algorithms of how they became monsters, that's a threat. So just like narcissistic parents and narcissists in general, they have to stop that change. They have to siphon that energy for their own good. So they make you to be the bad guy, which makes them into the good guy. They are doing this for your security. They're doing this for your protection, your own good. They are censoring this information for you. And the people who do not have the capacity to reflect upon themselves resort to that codependent behavior, which is why more than half of the people in the world cannot see the corruption, because their codependency, the veil of codependency, their love that they've been conditioned from childhood, like a parent, like looking back, a parent, you would not think that a parent would do this to a child. It's absurd. But when you really look at it, it's real. People are looking at the system like, the system wouldn't do that to us. It's the same story. It's the same reflection. They cannot look at the system the same way they cannot look at their parents. These are the ones who had been given everything, who were so-called successful in the world. Their loving, beautiful, successful, hard-working parents couldn't have done this stuff to us, just as this system couldn't have done anything to anybody. They created these lightweight monsters, subconscious monsters, surrounding themselves in a world of distractive measures to maintain the lack of accountability and the lack of self-reflection. And before you even allow yourself to reflect upon yourself, your sense of self has to be destroyed. This is why your history has to be destroyed. This is why your culture has to be watered down, destroyed, turned into pop. This is why they have to tear your people down as a means to hide the criminal behavior of the people that they have put on these pedestals. They'll put 500 interviews, 500 television news stories about P. Diddy out there. You hear nothing about Epstein and the people in power who are connected to that individual. Our people are used to distract from that reflection. They are the ones who have been put on that pedestal. We're the ones buried underneath that pedestal. And we're no longer allowing that to happen. We are writing our own story. And for people who don't have a story that they are comfortable with, when you write that story, when you write your own story, it's a definite threat. And it's painful as hell. And they will do anything within their powers to stop that. This includes destroying their own kin, their own future generations, to maintain the illusion of their own fairy tale, burnout neurological storylines, living in that world of pornographic psychology, burning themselves out, calling it normal. Like Toni Morrison said, if you can only be tall because you keep other people on their knees, then you have a serious problem. This goes for the world. This goes for these parents. This goes for these individuals in relationships who abuse their so-called loved ones. We're no longer on our knees. We are standing up, and we don't need you. Your perspectives are irrelevant. Your feelings on this situation are irrelevant. This is something that each individual has to do on their own. And on a massive scale, when we do this on our own, it will start to expose these things that affect all of us. And people don't want that to happen. So whether it's YouTube censoring information from getting out there to people so that they will open them up to change, or a parent doing this to a child in this moment so that they can avoid the responsibility of accountability later on down the line, either on the micro scale or the macro scale. It's the same story, and we're rewriting it in every moment.